Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in the earlier video we were discussing about the basics of prepared query. So in today's video we'll look into how we can go ahead and implement the use case one where there were multiple versions of application that were running. So in this case the first thing that we need to do for today's demo is first we have to create a service with two versions, which are version 1 and version 2. So going back to our notes, the first thing that we'll do is we'll go ahead and create two services. So the first will have a file name of web-1.json. So within here you have a port of 8080 and you are specifying a tag of version 1. Now for the service 2, the file name would be web2.json and the port this time will be different, which is 9080, and again the tag that we'll be giving here is version 2. So let's go ahead and try it out. So let me copy the first one. So within the consul.d directory, let's go ahead and create a file called as web-1.json and I'll paste the contents here. Similarly, I'll go ahead and create a file called as web-2.json and let me go ahead and copy the configuration and I'll paste the contents here. So as of now, here you'll see that you do not really have any service for web. So let's go ahead and do a console reload. So I'll say console reload. That's great. So now here you see that you have a service of web. There are two instances. One is associated with version 1 and second is associated with the version 2. Note here you also see web 1 and web 2, which is nothing but the ID associated with both the service. So the ID for the first one was web1 and the ID for the second one was web2. So we see that there are two different ports that are associated. So now we'll go ahead and we'll create a prepared query that will reference to this version 2 of the service here. So the overall steps for creating a prepared query is very simple. All you have to do is you have to specify a name for your prepared query. In this case, the name is web-service, and then you'll have to specify which web service should be returned and which is the version of that web service that should be returned. So let's go ahead and copy it up. So let's go to temp directory. Let's go ahead and create a file called as prepared query.json and I'll go ahead and save the change. Now once our prepared query is created, once our file associated with the prepared query is created, the next step is to go ahead and create a prepared query, which can be done via the HTTP API. So you are making a post request to this specific endpoint of version 1 query, which is used to create a prepared query, and you're referencing to a file called as prepared-query.json. So let's go ahead and copy this up and let's go ahead and paste it. So within the return, you will basically get the ID of your prepared query. Now alternatively, you can also see the latest prepared query that are available by making a curl request. Now if you quickly look into the prepared query HTTP endpoint, let's go a bit down. So basically we want to see the list of prepared queries that are available. So you can make a curl request directly to the endpoint of version 1 query. So let's do a curl on the specific endpoint, and here you see you are basically getting the ID of your query. Now you can store this specific ID primarily because if you want to perform some operations like delete, you will need to also specify the ID of your prepared query here. So let's go ahead and make a request to localhost on the port of 8600. This time the format is the prepared query name, which is web service .query.consul, and as expected you are seeing the IP. Let's also change to SRV record, where you'll also see the port, which is 9080. Now let's assume that current set of prepared query is referenced to version 2 and that is the reason why port 9080 is been referenced. Now you want to change it to version 1 of your applications so that all the client requests redirects to port 8080. So let's look into how we can do that. So going to the endpoint documentation here. So if you look into update a prepared query, you basically have to make use of a method of put, and the path is query followed by this UUID. So let's look into the sample request. So you have curl request of put, the data of payload.json, and this time you have to specify the UUID of the prepared query that was created. So first let's quickly find the UUID. So this is the UUID of our prepared query. So let's do a curl. The request would be put, the data would be prepared query.json, and the endpoint is 127.0.0.1 followed by version 1 query, and you'll also have to specify the UUID here. Now before we make change, let's go ahead and modify our prepared query.json to reference to the tag 1 this time. So now let's go ahead and make a curl request here. So it says that the request decode has failed, primarily because we missed one thing here. Let's reference it to @prepared query.json, and things are working perfectly well. So this time when we do a dig, you see that it is automatically referencing to the 8080 port here. So for the application, all you can do is you can give this endpoint that the application can query, and it can fetch the latest port and the latest IP. It does not really need to worry about version changes and so on. All is taken care by the prepared query. Now let's also look into how we can delete a prepared query. So if you go a bit down, the overall steps are very simple. The primary thing that you have to change is you have to add a method of delete. So you have curl request of delete and specifying the UUID on a specific endpoint. So we'll use the last command of put. All we'll do is we'll go ahead and change the request to delete. Now to verify if a query is deleted, you can go ahead and do a curl on the query endpoint, and now you see there are no queries that are available. Great. So that's the high level overview about the first use case associated with a prepared query.